A blade forged in the 12th century contains structures we did not learn to name until 1991. A slab of concrete poured 2,000 years ago is stronger right now than the day Roman engineers set it. An algorithm written by a television repairman compressed a feature-length film into 8 kilobytes, roughly the memory footprint of this paragraph. None of these are legends. The blade was examined under electron microscopy. The concrete was core sampled by a materials science lab at the University of Utah. The algorithm was demonstrated in front of the former chief technology officer of Philips. And every single one of these technologies is gone. Not obsolete, not superseded. Gone. The steel cannot be forged. The concrete recipe was buried under 1,000 years of rubble. The algorithm vanished when a floppy disk disappeared from a dead man's house. 10 processes, 10 materials, 10 systems. Each one solved a problem we still struggle with today. And in every case, the knowledge that made them possible slipped through our fingers, sometimes by accident, sometimes by neglect, and in at least 2 cases, by deliberate execution. In 2006, a research team at the University of Bern, led by materials scientist Peter Poffler, placed a fragment of a Damascus sword under a transmission electron microscope. What they found made them run the analysis twice. Woven through the steel were carbon nanotubes, hollow cylinders of carbon atoms, each roughly 50 nanometers in diameter. Alongside them sat nanowires of cementite, iron carbide, threaded through the metal like veins through muscle. This is the kind of nanostructure that modern labs produce under strictly controlled conditions, using chemical vapor deposition. It requires precise temperatures, specific gas mixtures, and equipment that did not exist before the late 20th century. And yet there it was, locked inside a blade forged somewhere between the 11th and 18th centuries in workshops stretching from India to Syria. The steel is called woots. It originated in southern India, where iron ore was smelted with charcoal in sealed clay crucibles at temperatures above 1,500 degrees Celsius. The resulting ingots were shipped west along trade routes to Damascus, where Syrian smiths forged them into blades with a surface pattern that looked like flowing water. European crusaders called it watered steel. They had never seen anything like it. The swords were lighter, harder, and more flexible than anything a European forge could produce. Legends claimed a Damascus blade could slice through a rifle barrel or cut a silk scarf as it drifted through the air. The key was chemistry nobody understood at the time. The Indian ore contained trace amounts of vanadium, tungsten, and chromium, impurities that, at the right temperature, catalyzed the spontaneous formation of carbon nanostructures within the steel. The smiths did not know they were making nanotechnology. They knew the ritual: heat to this color, quench in this liquid, fold this many times. And it worked, until it stopped. By the mid-18th century, the pattern vanished from new blades. The edges dulled, the flexibility disappeared. Smiths followed the same steps, used the same tools, and produced ordinary steel. Modern metallurgists believe the answer lies underground. The specific Indian mines that yielded ore with the right trace elements were exhausted. When the dirt changed, the nanotubes stopped forming. And because no one had ever understood the chemistry, only the recipe, no one could adapt. The technique did not fade. It broke, silently, when the earth stopped cooperating. Here is what stays with me about Damascus steel. The craftsmen were not geniuses who lost their notes. They were masters of a process they never fully grasped. The intelligence was in the ore, not the smith. Strip away the romance, and what you have is a civilization running sophisticated nanotechnology by accident, and losing it the moment the raw ingredient shifted by a few parts per million. 2,000 years beneath the Mediterranean, and the concrete is getting stronger. That sentence should not be physically possible. Modern Portland cement begins to crack within 50 years. Roman harbor walls, submerged in salt water since the reign of Augustus, are denser and harder today than when they were poured. In 2017, a team led by geologist Marie Jackson at the University of Utah published findings in the journal American Mineralogist that finally explained why. Jackson's team drilled core samples from the ancient harbor at Portus Cosanus and analyzed them with X-ray microdiffraction at the Advanced Light Source at Berkeley National Laboratory. Inside the concrete, they found crystals of a mineral called aluminum tobermorite growing within the pore spaces. Tobermorite is rare in nature. It typically forms only in volcanic conditions, extreme heat, extreme pressure. Somehow, Roman concrete was generating it at ambient temperature, inside seawater. Zoom in close enough with an electron microscope, and the crystals look like tiny interlocking plates, each one a few micrometers across, thinner than a human hair by a factor of 50. They grow into cracks like roots into soil, bonding the fractured surfaces together. The mechanism was chemical. Roman engineers mixed volcanic ash from the Bay of Naples, a material they called pulvis putillanus, with lime and seawater. The alkaline reaction between the calcium in the lime and the aluminosilicates in the ash produced tobermorite crystals that grew slowly over centuries, filling microcracks as they appeared. The concrete was healing itself. Modern concrete does the opposite. The Portland cement we use today is designed to be inert. When it cracks, seawater infiltrates and corrodes the steel reinforcement inside. The structure weakens. Roman marine concrete contained no steel. It needed no reinforcement. The seawater was not an enemy. It was the catalyst that kept the material alive. The recipe disappeared in the early medieval period, when the trade networks that shipped Neapolitan volcanic ash across the Mediterranean collapsed. Later builders used different materials, different ratios. The specific combination, that particular ash, that particular proportion of lime and salt water, was lost. And with it went a material that outperforms anything we pour today. Now pause on this detail, because it connects to what we just covered. Damascus steel vanished when a specific ore deposit ran dry. Roman concrete vanished when a specific volcanic ash became unavailable. Two technologies, separated by 1,000 years and 3,000 miles, both destroyed by the same cause. The earth changed, and the recipe stopped working. The knowledge was never in the human, it was in the geology. And geology does not care about your blueprints. The device was the size of a shoebox. It was corroded almost beyond recognition. When it surfaced from the wreck of a Roman cargo ship off the island of Antikythera in 1901, no one understood what it was. For decades, it sat in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, catalogued as an unremarkable lump of bronze. Then, in 1959, a British physicist named Derek de Solla Price obtained permission to X-ray the fragment. What the images revealed stunned him. Inside the corroded casing were more than 30 interlocking bronze gears, each cut with triangular teeth of astonishing precision. Some gears no larger than a coin, yet machined with tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. De Solla Price spent the next 15 years publishing his analysis, culminating in a monograph called Gears from the Greeks. And his conclusion was unambiguous. This was a mechanical computer, built in the 2nd century before the Common Era, capable of calculating the positions of the Sun, the Moon, and at least 5 planets. In 2005, an international team called the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project used industrial X-ray tomography to read inscriptions hidden inside the corroded fragments. They found over 3,000 Greek characters engraved on the interior surfaces, an instruction manual etched directly into the bronze. The text described how to operate the device, which dials corresponded to which celestial cycles, and how to adjust for the irregular motion of the moon. More recent analysis, using high-resolution computed tomography, has confirmed that the device also predicted solar and lunar eclipses and tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. But the single detail that stops historians cold is the differential gear. The Antikythera mechanism contains a gear train that combines 2 separate rotational inputs into a single output, the same principle used in every car differential on the road today. This mechanism was not reinvented in Europe until the 16th century. That is a gap of roughly 1,700 years. One device, found in one shipwreck. No workshop has ever been identified, no written manual survives. No apprentice carried the design forward. After the wreck sank, the tradition, if it was a tradition, vanished without a trace. What haunts researchers is not the complexity alone, it is the implication. A device this precise does not emerge from nothing. It requires generations of refinement, trial prototypes, failed versions. Someone had to cut those gears by hand, each tooth filed to a fraction of a millimeter using tools no more sophisticated than a bronze chisel and a magnifying lens. Picture the hands, picture the hours, picture the eye strain, and then picture the workshop where this happened. A room we cannot find, in a city we cannot name, producing instruments we did not know existed until a sponge diver stumbled onto a shipwreck in 1901. Somewhere in the ancient Greek world, there must have been dozens of earlier machines, simpler predecessors, workshop drawings, training manuals. None have been found. Either they were all destroyed, or we have not found the right shipwreck yet. Cremona, Italy, 1713. Antonio Stradivari is 70 years old. His workshop on Piazza San Domenico has produced instruments for 4 decades, violins, violas, cellos, and by this point, his hands have shaped more than 1,000. He works alone for the final stage. No apprentice touches the lacquer. The lacquer is the secret. Or at least, that is what 3 centuries of acousticians, chemists, and luthiers have desperately wanted to believe. Because the sound that emerges from a Stradivarius is different. Not louder, not brighter. Different in a way that trained musicians recognize instantly, but struggle to articulate. A warmth, a resonance in the upper partials. A quality that modern science calls formant modification, and musicians simply call alive. In 2009, a team of researchers in Paris, led by Jean-Philippe Echard at the Cité de la Musique, used infrared spectroscopy and scanning electron microscopy to analyze samples of the original Stradivari varnish. They found mineral particles embedded in the coating, quartz, feldspar, and traces of titanium dioxide. These were not accidental. Someone had deliberately ground mineral dust into the lacquer and applied it to the raw spruce before the final varnish coat. The mineral layer acted as a sealant. It penetrated the wood fibers, stiffening certain areas while leaving others flexible. The result was a vibrational asymmetry across the top plate, the precise condition needed to produce the complex, layered overtone structure that makes a Stradivarius sound the way it does. But the minerals alone do not explain everything. Dendrochronologists have shown that the spruce Stradivari used grew during the Maunder Minimum, a period of abnormally low solar activity between 1645 and 1715 that produced colder winters and denser, more uniform tree rings. The wood itself was different, harder, more consistent, grown by a climate that no longer exists. And there was the canal treatment. Venetian luthiers floated their spruce logs down canals before drying them. The mineral-rich water infused the wood with salts that further altered its acoustic properties. Stradivari may have inherited this practice without ever knowing the science behind it. He died in 1737. His sons continued the workshop for a few years. The sound was never the same. The precise combination, that mineral grout, that specific wood from that specific climate, that canal water, existed for 1 generation in 1 city. I have been told my hearing is sharper than most. If so, it does me no good here. Because the difference between a Stradivarius and its finest modern copy is not about hearing more. It is about hearing something that should not be missing, and is. Rome, 1st century of the Common Era. A craftsman kneels before Emperor Tiberius and places a glass drinking vessel on the marble floor. He picks it up and throws it down. The cup does not shatter. It dents like a piece of soft metal, a shallow impression in the rim. The craftsman takes a small hammer, taps the dent, and the glass returns to its original shape. Tiberius asks one question. Has anyone else seen this? The craftsman says no. Tiberius has him killed on the spot. The reasoning, according to Pliny the Elder, who documented this account in his Natural History, was economic. If glass could be made unbreakable, it would collapse the value of gold and silver. An empire built on precious metals could not afford an indestructible alternative. That is the entire story. No formula survives. No fragment of the glass has been identified in any archaeological collection. Modern chemists have speculated that the craftsman may have introduced borax into the glass melt, producing something resembling borosilicate glass, the same family as laboratory Pyrex, roughly 1900 years before the Corning Glassworks patented it. Others have suggested a metallic glass, an amorphous alloy with a disordered atomic structure that absorbs impact instead of fracturing. In 2010, researchers at the California Institute of Technology did produce a metallic glass that dents rather than shatters, a material with properties eerily similar to what Pliny described. They were not trying to replicate the Roman account. They had never read it. Skeptics point out that no physical evidence exists, and that Roman authors were fond of embellishing stories about imperial cruelty. The account may be a fable, but the logic of the execution is the part that resists dismissal. Even if the glass never existed, the reasoning is real. An empire recognized that a superior technology could destabilize its economy, and chose stability over progress. And that pattern, an authority destroying an invention because it works too well, is not ancient. It is the oldest recurring theme in this entire investigation. Remember it. We will see it again before the end. London, 1837. Charles Babbage's sketching, not drawings of bridges or steam engines, drawings of something that will not receive a proper name for another 100 years. The machine is the size of a locomotive, entirely mechanical, powered by a hand crank or, in later designs, by steam. It has a central processing unit. Babbage calls it the mill. It has a memory bank. He calls it the store, capable of holding 1,000 numbers, each 50 digits long. It accepts instructions via punched cards borrowed from the Jacquard loom. It can branch, loop, and perform conditional operations. The design specifies a printer that formats output automatically. This is not a calculator. This is a programmable, general-purpose computer, conceived in the 1830s, a full century before ENIAC. Ada Lovelace, a mathematician and the daughter of Lord Byron, writes what historians now recognize as the first computer program. Not pseudocode, not a flowchart. A step-by-step algorithm designed to compute Bernoulli numbers on Babbage's analytical engine, complete with nested loops and a clear separation between data and instructions. She also writes, in her published notes, a sentence that would take a century to fully appreciate. The machine might compose music, produce graphics, and manipulate symbols beyond mere arithmetic. In 1843, she saw what the rest of the world would not see until the 1950s. The British government disagrees with the project's value. After sinking £17,000 into Babbage's earlier difference engine, a sum equivalent to roughly £2.5 million today, the Treasury refuses further funding. The analytical engine is never built. Babbage spends the remaining decades of his life refining designs that no one will manufacture. The gap this created is not metaphor. It is measurable. Modern computer historians estimate that if the analytical engine had been completed and iterated upon, practical computing could have arrived decades before it did. The transistor was not needed. The vacuum tube was not needed. Babbage's design was purely mechanical, gears, levers, cams, and it was architecturally complete. And here begins a pattern that makes this investigation feel less like history and more like a recurring nightmare. Because the British government did not kill computing once, it killed it twice. 1945. The war is over. Alan Turing, who has spent the past 6 years breaking German codes at Bletchley Park, joins the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington, outside London, with a single objective: to build the fastest computer in the world. His design is called the automatic computing engine. It uses mercury delay lines, sealed glass tubes filled with liquid mercury, through which ultrasonic pulses travel at roughly 1,500 meters per second. Data is encoded as patterns of compression waves inside the mercury. A pulse enters one end, travels the length of the tube, is read at the other end, and is immediately re-injected. The mercury remembers by echoing. Where other early computers of the era process instructions one at a time, Turing's architecture distributes operations across multiple delay lines running simultaneously. It is, in essence, a form of parallel processing, a concept that mainstream computing would not embrace for another 40 years. The Pilot Ace, a scaled-down prototype, becomes operational in 1950 and is immediately the fastest computer on the planet, executing instructions at a speed of 1 megahertz. Engineers who worked on it later recalled that the machine felt decades ahead of anything else in existence. But Turing clashes with the laboratory's management. Meetings are held about meetings. Requisition forms take weeks. Decisions that should take days take months. The man who cracked Enigma, arguably shortening the war by 2 years and saving millions of lives, cannot get approval for basic components. By 1948, Turing leaves the project in frustration, moving to Manchester. The full ACE design is never completed. The laboratory builds a simpler, less ambitious version, the Deuce, and abandons most of Turing's architectural innovations. The parallel processing framework, the elegant memory hierarchy, the distributed instruction set, all shelved. 1 century earlier, a British mathematician designed the first programmable computer and was denied funding. Now, a British mathematician designs the fastest computer of his era and is denied support. The institution is different. The excuse is different. The result is identical. The cruelest detail in the history of computing is that it was set back twice by the same country for reasons that had nothing to do with whether the machines worked. Schenectady, New York, 1931. Inside a General Electric laboratory, an engineer named Gabriel Kron, a Hungarian immigrant with a gift for tensor mathematics, is working on the Stanford Network Analyzer, a massive analog computer used to simulate electrical power grids. The machine uses physical resistors, capacitors, and inductors to model real-world circuits. Kron publishes a paper in the Journal of Applied Physics in 1945, describing a peculiar component he calls the negative resistor. In standard electrical theory, a resistor dissipates energy. It turns current into heat. Kron's device, he claims, does the opposite. When inserted into the analyzer's circuit, it introduces energy rather than consuming it. He writes that when the negative resistor is active, the external power generator can be disconnected and the circuit continues to operate. Now, let me be clear about the credibility gradient here. The publication is real. The journal is peer-reviewed. The Stanford Network Analyzer is a documented machine. But the claim, a circuit that sustains itself without external power, contradicts the second law of thermodynamics as understood by every mainstream physicist alive. Kron himself framed the phenomenon in terms of Oliver Heaviside's suppressed electromagnetic field equations, a mathematical framework that mainstream physics regards as either obsolete or misinterpreted. According to Kron, the standard Maxwell-Lorentz equations omit what he called the Heaviside component, energy flowing outside the conductor that is present but unmeasured. General Electric and the United States Navy classified portions of Kron's work and prohibited him from publishing the construction details of the negative resistor. He remained at General Electric for the rest of his career, publishing dense mathematical papers that alternative energy researchers still treat as encrypted instructions. Personally, I think the energy claims are almost certainly wrong. The physics does not support a perpetual circuit, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence that has never materialized. But here is what nags at me. Governments do not censor bad science. Bad science is self-correcting. It fails in labs, gets retracted in journals, and quietly disappears. You censor things that either work or that you are afraid might embarrass someone powerful enough to demand silence. And the fact that Kron was silenced rather than debunked is the part of this story that refuses to sit still. Imagine you are defending a city. The walls at your back are 30 feet thick. The enemy fleet fills the horizon, mast after mast, sail after sail, stretching across the strait like a floating forest. Your own ships are smaller and fewer. And then your engineers wheel out bronze tubes, mounted on the prow like artillery, and unleash a torrent of liquid that ignites on contact with the sea. The flames spread across the surface of the water. They cling to hulls. They burn men who dive overboard to escape. Throwing water on it makes it worse. Sand might smother it. Vinegar might slow it. Nothing reliably kills it. This is the weapon that saved Constantinople for 700 years. In 678, an Arab fleet of over 1,000 ships besieged the city for 4 consecutive years. The Byzantines deployed their sea fire and burned the invasion fleet so thoroughly that Arab naval ambitions in the eastern Mediterranean stalled for a generation. The weapon was used again in 717 and again in 941. Each time, it turned certain defeat into decisive victory. History calls it Greek fire. And for all those centuries, the formula was the most closely guarded state secret in the world. Revealing it carried the death penalty. Even emperors wrote about it only in coded allusions. The best reconstruction we have comes from fragmentary references in Byzantine military manuals, texts written by emperors and generals who knew the weapon existed but were careful never to describe its composition in full. The base was almost certainly naphtha, crude petroleum distilled into a volatile liquid. To this, Byzantine chemists likely added quicklime, which ignites on contact with water, and sulfur, which produces choking fumes. The mixture was pressurized and sprayed through bronze siphons, an engineering achievement in itself, requiring sealed chambers and hand-operated pumps capable of withstanding enormous internal pressure. What makes Greek fire different from simple incendiaries is the delivery system. This was not a jar of flaming oil lobbed by catapult. This was a pressurized flamethrower mounted on a warship, capable of projecting a continuous stream of adhesive fire across open water. The combination of chemistry and engineering was so effective that no enemy fleet ever developed a reliable countermeasure. When Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, the formula died with the last artisans who knew it. The Ottomans captured the city. They did not capture the recipe. They did not need it. They had gunpowder. And so the most effective naval weapon of the medieval world was replaced, not replicated. And the precise mechanism that made it cling and burn on water was never recorded in enough detail to be reproduced. Modern chemists have tried. None have succeeded in creating a self-igniting, water-adhesive, pressurizable liquid that matches every Byzantine description simultaneously. 9 things gone. 9 trails that end in silence. And I have spent enough time tracking vanished things to know that the trail that goes coldest often guards the strangest find. Roll Pieper, the former chief technology officer of Philips Electronics, was not a man who was easily impressed. He had built a career evaluating technologies for one of the largest electronics companies on the planet. Tom Perkins, co-founder of Kleiner Perkins, the venture capital firm that backed Google, Amazon, and Genentech, was even harder to fool. He had seen every pitch, every prototype, every overpromise the technology industry could generate. In 1999, both men sat in a room in the Netherlands and watched a demonstration they could not explain. A man named Jan Sloot, a self-taught electronics repairman from the town of Nieuwegein, inserted a smart card into a device he had built in his home workshop. The card contained 64 kilobytes of data. That is not a typo. 64 kilobytes, less than a single email attachment. And from that card, 16 full-length feature films began playing simultaneously on 16 separate monitors. Full quality, no buffering, no compression artifacts. Sloot's patent, NL1009908C2, filed with the Netherlands Patent Office, describes a system that does not compress video in any conventional sense. Instead, it divides each frame into blocks of 16 by 16 pixels and assigns each block a short identifier that points to a pre-built dictionary of visual patterns stored in the decoder. The film is not stored on the card. The card contains instructions, a set of addresses that tell the decoder which patterns to assemble and in what order. The data on the card is essentially a recipe, not a recording. The mathematics of this are, to put it gently, contested. The pigeonhole principle, a fundamental theorem in combinatorics, states that if you have more items than containers, at least 2 items must share a container. Applied to video compression, this means you cannot losslessly encode more information than the storage medium physically holds. 8 kilobytes cannot describe a feature film without losing data. The math says so. The math has been saying so since the 19th century, and yet 2 of the most technically sophisticated investors in Europe watched it work. Sloot was preparing to sign a licensing deal with Philips that would have been worth billions. The technology, if real, would have made high-definition video streaming possible over ordinary telephone lines at a time when most of the world was still on dial-up connections. On July 10, 1999, 2 days before the final contract signing, Jan Sloot suffered a heart attack in his garden and died. Within hours, Pieper and his team began searching for the compiler, the software component that generated the smart card instructions from raw video. Sloot had kept it on a single floppy disk. The disk was not in his house. It was not in his workshop. It was not in his car. Months of searching by some of the most motivated executives in the Dutch technology sector turned up nothing. The floppy disk has never been found. Now here is the uncomfortable crossroads. Either the system worked, in which case we lost a technology that would have reshaped telecommunications a decade before broadband, or it did not, in which case a self-taught repairman fooled 2 of the sharpest technology evaluators alive using a hidden hard drive and a convincing performance. I have read the patent. The principle is elegant. The mathematics say impossible. Two credible witnesses say otherwise. And here is the thread that connects this final case to the first. 2,000 years ago, a Roman glassmaker showed an emperor something that should not have been possible. The emperor had him killed. In 1999, a Dutch repairman prepared to show the world something that should not have been possible. He died before he could sign the papers. The gap between those two stories is 20 centuries. The pattern is identical. An inventor demonstrates a technology that threatens existing power structures. The inventor dies. The technology vanishes. The only difference is that Tiberius acted on purpose, and we cannot prove anyone else did. 10 technologies, 10 disappearances. Some were lost to depleted minds, some to institutional cowardice, some to empire collapse, and some to timing so unfortunate it looks like design. The question is not whether these things existed. They did. The steel was analyzed. The concrete was core sampled. The mechanism was X-rayed. The violin was played. The question is what else existed alongside them? The prototypes, the predecessors, the parallel inventions that vanished so completely we do not even know to miss them. Which of these 10 losses do you find hardest to forgive? Not the most mysterious, the one that makes you angriest. Name it. Make your case. The most convincing argument gets pinned. Subscribe. The next investigation is already underway.